Hello, and welcome to the deep dive. We're absolutely thrilled to have you with us today.
We really are. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and if you are tuning in, you are probably the kind of person who is constantly curious. Someone who loves to peer under the hood of how the world works.
Right. Someone who appreciates getting a really comprehensive, nuanced understanding of complex systems.
Exactly. Without feeling completely overwhelmed by just an avalanche of disconnected data. And today, we have a truly fascinating journey mapped out for you.
We really do.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a rich, highly detailed synthesis of research regarding one of the most universal, deeply impactful topics in human existence.
We are talking about the vast, constantly evolving landscape of global education and student life.
Yeah, the whole thing. We're going to explore the underlying architecture of learning systems worldwide, the soaring, sometimes crippling costs of higher education.
Oh, absolutely crippling.
Right, and the rapid digital transformation of the modern classroom, plus the intense psychological pressures facing students today.
It's a massive topic.
It is. But more than just listing facts, we really want to figure out how to actually articulate these incredibly complex global ideas clearly and persuasively.
And that articulation is exactly why this deep dive is so vital. What's fascinating here is that looking at the global structure of education is not just some academic exercise.
No, definitely not.
It isn't merely about comparing test scores or memorizing policy differences. When we analyze how different countries structure their learning systems, we are actually uncovering the fundamental DNA of how those societies operate.
The core of it.
Exactly. We are looking directly at what different cultures prioritize, how they view human potential, and how they allocate their most precious resources, their time, their capital, and their youth.
Yeah, in many ways, examining a country's education system is just the ultimate shortcut to understanding its broader cultural and economic engine.
It really is. By looking at how a nation teaches its children, you can clearly see its underlying values, its economic anxieties, and its specific hopes for the future.
So true.
And we're going to break down these diverse systems to see what makes them tick. And importantly, because education is a field filled with highly debated, deeply polarizing philosophies, we will impartially examine the realities, the trade-offs, and the specific arguments on all sides of the spectrum.
I love that framing. It really elevates this from a conversation about just, school to a conversation about human development.
Exactly.
So as we go through this, we really want you to think about your own educational experiences. Where did you fit into this puzzle, and how did the system you grew up in shape the way you think today?
That's the perfect lens to view this through.
Let's start right at the beginning, the actual architectural blueprints of learning. Globally, the journey kicks off with primary and secondary education.
The foundational stage.
Right. Capturing that critical window of neurological and social development from about age 5 up to 18.
And that primary school phase, usually ages 5 to 11, is universally focused on establishing absolute bedrock skills.
We aren't just talking about the basic mechanics of literacy and numeracy either.
No, we are talking about the initial cognitive wiring for critical thinking, pattern recognition, and social cooperation. The core subjects, language, mathematics, basic empirical science, they're essentially the universal operating system that every country tries to install in its citizens.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those early primary years are about establishing a baseline of shared human capability.
It is the great equalizer phase.
Yeah. But the moment we move past that early baseline and look towards secondary education, roughly ages 12 to 18, the structural choices that different governments make start to diverge wildly.
They really do. Secondary education is the pivot point. It's where the curriculum broadens and where systems have to start making very hard, deliberate choices about how to prepare adolescents for the adult world.
And these structural choices are never accidental.
Never. Take the United Kingdom, for instance.
Okay, yeah, the UK system.
The UK organizes these developmental years into distinct key stages. A student progresses through these stages until they hit age 16, at which point they encounter the GCSEs.
Right, the big exams.
Exactly. These are major, standardized public exams that serve as a rigorous structural gatekeeper. Everything in the preceding years is essentially a runway leading up to this specific testing milestone.
And that milestone then dictates the options available for their final 2 years of secondary schooling.
Yes, precisely.
Let's pause on that because I think we often underestimate the psychological weight of a system designed around a gatekeeper exam at age 16.
Oh, the pressure is immense.
You have a teenager whose prefrontal cortex is still very much under construction, and society is essentially telling them, How you perform over this 2-week testing window will fundamentally dictate your trajectory.
It's a heavy burden for a 16-year-old.
Comparing that to the U.S. system, it's a completely different rhythm.
Very different.
The U.S. generally avoids that kind of mid-adolescent filtering. You typically have elementary, middle, and then a linear 4-year high school path that theoretically keeps everyone in the same general talent pool until they're 18, culminating in a diploma.
Right. It's a much broader, arguably more forgiving runway.
But hold on. Here's where it gets really interesting. Look at a system like Germany's.
Ah, yes, Germany.
Germany takes a fundamentally different and highly debated approach. Instead of keeping everyone on the exact same broad academic path until adulthood, they channel students into distinct educational tracks very early on, sometimes around age 10 or 12.
That's incredibly early.
It is. You have the gymnasium track, which is highly academic and geared entirely toward university prep. But running parallel to that, you have robust vocational tracks focused heavily on practical, trade-based skills.
And this raises an important question about the underlying philosophy of an economy. By separating students into these distinct tracks so early, Germany is making a very clear, pragmatic, structural statement about workforce needs.
Right. They are acknowledging that a functioning society requires brilliant engineers and brilliant electricians.
And they fund both pathways rigorously. On one side of the economic debate, this early specialization is praised because it provides clear, highly valued, and structured pathways into technical careers.
It ensures the German economy has an incredibly reliable, world-renowned supply of skilled tradespeople.
Exactly. It removes the ambiguity of adolescence. But on the other side of the analysis, you have to look at the developmental psychology of tracking a 10-year-old.
Which is controversial.
Highly. Systems where everyone follows a shared path for longer, like the U.S. model, are built on the philosophy of the late bloomer. The argument is that you shouldn't ask a child to commit to a socioeconomic trajectory before they've even gone through puberty.
The U.S. model values a universal, shared democratic experience, whereas the German model values precision and economic efficiency.
Exactly. And I think it's crucial to point out that neither system is flawless. They just choose different problems to manage.
Yeah, the U.S. struggles with a massive skills gap in the trades, while Germany constantly debates the social mobility implications of early tracking.
It's a trade-off.
Always. But let's shift from the structure to the actual daily environment of learning. How do different cultures define a successful day at school?
This is where it gets really stark.
The contrast between Japan and Finland is the perfect case study here.
Let's look at Japan first. In Japan, you have a system characterized by intense rigor and a hyper-focus on high-stakes, standardized exams.
The curriculum is highly prescribed, the discipline is formidable.
And the system absolutely delivers on its goal: predictably high academic test scores on the global stage.
But the byproduct, the inevitable shadow side of that hyper-efficiency, is an intense, sometimes crushing level of stress and anxiety among the student population.
It's a very real cost. And then on the exact opposite end of the pedagogical spectrum, you have Finland.
Finland is so fascinating.
Finland's system is globally analyzed because it seemingly breaks all the rules of traditional academic rigor and still produces top-tier results. They prioritize holistic development over standardized testing.
In fact, they actively avoid standardized testing until the very end of secondary school.
Right. They lean heavily into student-centered, phenomenon-based learning, and perhaps most critically, they grant incredible autonomy to their teachers.
Which is a huge cultural difference.
It is. Teaching in Finland is a highly competitive, deeply respected profession, akin to being a doctor or a lawyer. Because they trust the teachers so implicitly, they don't feel the need to micromanage them with constant national testing.
They define learning much more broadly than just the acquisition of testable data. They focus on emotional regulation, social cooperation, and creative problem solving.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Without those standardized tests, how does the Finnish government actually know if a school in a rural area is failing?
That's a fair question.
If you remove the metrics, don't you risk kids slipping through the cracks unnoticed?
That is exactly the pushback that data-driven policymakers always bring up. The Finnish response is that their teachers are so highly trained, all requiring rigorous master's degrees, that the assessment happens continuously at the micro level within the classroom.
They argue that standardized tests don't actually diagnose individual learning gaps, they just rank students against each other.
Right. Finland relies on rapid, early intervention by special education professionals the moment a teacher notices a student struggling, rather than waiting for an end-of-year test to confirm the student has failed.
And for you, the listener, understanding these specific philosophical differences is incredibly empowering.
It gives you a whole new vocabulary.
It does. When you are analyzing global trends, or even just looking at local school board policies, being able to articulate the fundamental tension between a standardized, exam-driven curriculum designed for accountability and a holistic, teacher-autonomous system designed for individual development gives you immense analytical clarity.
So as students transition out of these varying secondary crucibles, no matter what path they were on, many hit the next monumental phase, higher education.
The big leap.
We are entering the realm of specialized degrees, bachelor's, master's, doctorates, where the focus shifts from general foundational knowledge to intense, specialized expertise.
In fields like advanced engineering, neuroscience, constitutional law, or the humanities.
But regardless of the intellectual pursuit, there is one overwhelming, inescapable reality that defines higher education globally today.
The staggering, often paralyzing cost.
Exactly. The price of specialized knowledge has outpaced almost every other economic metric. Let's look at the US model. Private university tuition, just the sticker price for the classes, can easily exceed $50,000 or $60,000 a single year.
And that is before you calculate the exorbitant costs of housing, meal plans, textbooks, and mandatory fees.
We are looking at $250,000 for a 4-year degree. That creates a monolithic socioeconomic barrier before a student even sets foot in a lecture hall.
And we have to look at the macroeconomic ripple effects of that model. When you saddle a 22-year-old with $80,000 of non-dischargeable debt, you aren't just affecting their personal bank account.
You're fundamentally altering the broader economy.
Exactly. That debt delays home ownership, it delays marriage, it delays the forming of new businesses, and it heavily dictates career choices.
A brilliant student who might want to become a public defender or a social worker is often forced into corporate finance simply to service the interest on their student loans.
It completely warps the labor market. Now, contrast that incredibly highly leveraged economic reality with the model we see in countries like Germany or much of Scandinavia.
The contrast is mind-blowing.
Higher education there is essentially free or requires a nominal administrative fee of a few €100 a semester. And remarkably, this often extends to international students as well. The state absorbs the costs.
Right, and this drastic contrast sets the stage for one of the most ferocious debates in modern public policy. Is higher education a private individual investment, or is it a fundamental public good?
The proponents of universally free education, the public good argument, state that removing tuition is the ultimate lever for meritocracy.
It obliterates the socioeconomic barrier. If you have the intellect and the work ethic, you get the training, regardless of your parents' tax bracket.
They argue that a highly educated, debt-free workforce creates a massive surge in national innovation, higher overall tax revenues later in life, and a more robust, competitive national economy.
It's viewed as infrastructure spending, no different than building a highway.
Precisely. But we must impartially examine the counter-arguments, because the economic realities are complex.
They always are.
Making higher education completely free imposes an immense, constant fiscal burden on the state. Governments operate with finite resources.
If a state is completely subsidizing university tuition, those billions of dollars have to come from somewhere, which means balancing it against healthcare, national defense, infrastructure, or early childhood education.
Furthermore, critics point out a structural risk. If a government stretches its budget too thin to guarantee free access for absolutely everyone, the overall quality of the institutions might degrade.
You might see massive lecture halls of 500 students, outdated laboratory equipment, and underpaid faculty.
There is also a psychological argument raised by some economists. If there is zero personal financial stake, no skin in the game, does the student value the degree less?
Does it lead to longer completion times and a lack of academic urgency?
I think the counter to that is that the skin in the game in Germany is the academic rigor itself. If you fail your exams, you are out. You don't get to just pay your way into staying.
But it is a massive balancing act. So what does a middle ground actually look like? Are we just trapped between crippling debt and overburdened state budgets?
When synthesizing these polarized viewpoints, policymakers often explore nuanced, tiered systems.
Like what?
For instance, rather than a blanket policy of $50,000 tuition or completely free models, Some propose income contingent systems.
Okay, how does that work?
This means the university is free at the point of entry, but graduates pay a slightly higher marginal tax rate later in life, only if and when their income surpasses a certain threshold.
Ah, so it functions like a success dividend back to the state.
Exactly. Or you see heavily subsidized models strictly for lower income tiers, while families with significant generational wealth pay closer to the actual cost of the service.
The key takeaway for you as a learner is to recognize that a tuition bill is never just a financial transaction.
No, never. It is a profound reflection of how a society defines equality, merit, and collective responsibility.
Okay, let's pivot slightly, because our entire conversation about higher education so far relies on a massive assumption.
What's that?
That a university degree is the only logical, respectable next step after high school. And we really need to dismantle that.
Absolutely.
Beyond the ivy-covered brick walls of the university, there are alternative pathways that are absolutely vital to the survival of modern infrastructure. We're talking about vocational training, apprenticeships, and the explosive growth of specialized online learning.
These are routes focused on highly practical, immediate skill acquisition.
Think about the careers that literally keep civilization from collapsing overnight. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, advanced manufacturing specialists, and nursing assistants.
In many Western cultures, there has been an unfortunate lingering stigma around vocational work, framing it as a backup plan.
But the economic reality tells a completely different story.
It absolutely does. The economic reality is that highly skilled tradespeople often out-earn university graduates, particularly when you factor in the lack of student debt and the ability to start earning years earlier.
This brings us to a fascinating global comparison. Look at Australia's TAFE system, technical and further education.
It is a globally recognized, highly sophisticated vocational network.
These institutes aren't viewed as second tier. They're deeply integrated with industry needs. Employers actively shape the curriculum.
When a student chooses a TAFE pathway in advanced robotics, welding, or sustainable agriculture, they are opting for targeted high-demand expertise.
They graduate with industry-certified skills that lead to almost immediate, high-paying employability because the market desperately needs what they can do.
And the debate here usually centers on immediate employability versus long-term career adaptability.
The argument for the traditional academic degree is that while a philosophy or sociology graduate might not have a hard technical skill to leverage on day one, the rigorous process of reading complex texts, forming arguments, and synthesizing data provides a broad cognitive adaptability.
The theory is that while specific technical skills might become obsolete due to automation in 10 years, the ability to think critically and adapt will protect the university graduate over a 40-year career.
It is a fascinating tension, but disrupting both the traditional university and the traditional trade school is the sheer unstoppable force of the online learning boom.
Oh, the online space is transforming everything.
Platforms like Coursera, ADX, and highly specialized cohort-based learning academies have completely blown the doors off traditional access.
What's fascinating here is the evolution of that online space. A decade ago, massive open online courses, or MOOCs, were criticized because they had completion rates of around 2 or 3%.
People would sign up, watch one video, and vanish.
Exactly. But the technology and the pedagogical design have matured incredibly. Now you have highly interactive cohort-based courses where professionals can upskill in machine learning, data science, or supply chain logistics over 6 weeks, entirely remotely.
Often while keeping their full-time job.
Yes, it represents the true democratization of high-level knowledge. A student in a remote village with a decent broadband connection now has theoretical access to the exact same computer science lectures as a student sitting in a lecture hall in Massachusetts.
Understanding how modern economies value these diverse pathways, whether it is the specialized precision of a vocational expert, the broad analytical adaptability of a university grad, or the rapid continuous upskilling of the online learner, is absolutely essential for navigating the future of work.
It's critical.
So we have mapped out the structures, we've debated the costs, and we've explored the diverse pathways. But let's ground this. Let's shift our focus to the actual ground-level, day-to-day reality of being a student right now.
Because navigating the modern student experience is rarely just about reading books. It is an incredibly complex psychological, financial, and emotional gauntlet.
Understanding these specific pressures is critical. Let's start with the academic workload, which feels more intense and higher stakes than ever before.
The competition for top-tier university placements is global and fierce.
Often driven by societal narratives that equate a specific brand name university with lifelong security and worth.
To truly understand the absolute extreme end of this academic pressure cooker, we have to look at phenomena like the Hagwons in South Korea.
These are the private, for-profit, after-school tutoring academies.
Right. In this system, it is entirely normalized for a student to finish their rigorous standard school day at 4 p.m. and then immediately commute to a Hagwon.
Or they might engage in relentless, high-intensity drilling and exam preparation until 10 or 11 o'clock at night.
It is an industrial-scale system designed to maximize performance on incredibly unforgiving national exams. And we have to look at the biology of what that does to a young person.
The constant singular focus on academic metrics, paired with sleep deprivation, elevates cortisol levels chronically.
This doesn't just lead to feeling tired. It leads to severe clinical levels of stress, widespread anxiety disorders, and profound psychological burnout.
It is the ultimate cautionary tale of what occurs when a society's drive for measurable academic excellence completely eclipses the holistic well-being of the developing child.
It's a terrifying picture of how a system can basically weaponize a child's ambition against them.
And compounding that academic pressure, you have the crushing daily weight of financial survival. We talked about the macroeconomics of tuition, but let's look at the micro-reality.
The day-to-day struggle.
Take international students studying in cities like London or Sydney. They're often facing tuition fees equivalent to $25,000 or more annually.
Now, add the astronomical cost of urban rent, transportation, and simply buying groceries.
The result is a state of constant, low-grade financial panic. Many of these students are forced to juggle their incredibly demanding academic schedules with 20 or 30 hours of part-time work, often in the service industry.
If we connect this to cognitive science, we have to talk about the bandwidth tax.
The bandwidth tax, right?
When a student is constantly worried about whether their debit card will decline at the grocery store or if they can make their shift at the cafe after their lab finishes, that financial anxiety consumes a massive amount of working memory and cognitive bandwidth.
It leaves significantly less mental processing power available for complex academic tasks.
Yes, working a part-time job teaches valuable life skills, budgeting, customer service, time allocation, but we cannot ignore the very real zero-sum trade-off.
Hours spent working are hours explicitly stolen from studying, resting, or networking.
The financial strain directly dictates and degrades their academic potential. And this brings us to the most universal, unrelenting challenge for almost all students: the sheer physics of time management.
How do you balance full-time study, part-time work, and the basic human need for sleep and social connection?
You don't, usually. Something always breaks.
And often, what breaks is the student's emotional well-being. Beyond the exams and the empty bank accounts, there are profound social and emotional hurdles, particularly concerning isolation.
This is magnified exponentially for students who move to entirely new cultures.
We often talk about culture shock as if it's just about getting used to new food or different weather, but it is deeply psychological.
Exhausting.
Imagine a brilliant student from rural China who travels to a major university in the American Midwest. This student might possess flawless, highly proficient academic English.
They can write a brilliant thesis on macroeconomics and understand every word of a dense lecture.
But they can still experience profound, agonizing social isolation. Why? Because academic English is not cultural fluency.
No, it's not.
The speed of a casual conversation in a loud dining hall, the heavy reliance on hyperlocal slang, the constant use of sarcasm.
And the incredibly complex, invisible web of unspoken social rules. How close to stand to someone, how to politely disagree, what pop culture references mean.
All of this creates a massive, exhausting barrier to genuine connection.
This is a critical distinction, the gap between linguistic competence and cultural fluency. That barrier, despite having strong formal language skills, leaves the student feeling constantly out of step, leading to deep homesickness and a sense of alienation.
To address these immense, multifaceted pressures, from the cortisol spikes of the Hagwons to the cognitive bandwidth tax of poverty to the deep isolation of culture shock, institutions have to evolve.
The most forward-thinking universities are realizing that simply providing a library and a lecture hall is negligent.
They are beginning to embed robust, accessible mental health triage and counseling directly into the campus infrastructure.
They are actively rethinking their assessment models, moving away from single high-stakes final exams that induce panic toward continuous, lower-stakes, holistic assessments.
Furthermore, they're completely revamping orientation programs. Instead of just showing international students where the cafeteria is, they are running intensive, long-term peer mentorship programs.
Focused specifically on conversational nuance, cultural adaptation, and building resilient social networks.
It all comes back to the realization that education does not exclusively happen while a student is staring silently at a whiteboard.
In fact, some of the most critical development happens when the textbooks are closed.
And that transitions us perfectly into one of my favorite topics, the hidden curriculum.
The hidden curriculum is fascinating.
We are talking about the vast ecosystem of learning that occurs entirely outside the formal graded classroom through extracurricular activities, athletics, debate clubs, drama societies, and community volunteering.
Historically, some overly rigid academic systems viewed these as mere distractions.
But cognitive and social scientists now recognize them as vital, irreplaceable laboratories for developing the exact competencies that the modern world desperately demands.
Adaptive leadership, complex teamwork, risk management, and persuasive communication.
Precisely. Let's break down the mechanics of this hidden curriculum. First, consider athletics.
Beyond the obvious, well-documented benefits to cardiovascular health and physical fitness, sports serve a much deeper psychological function.
Engaging in rigorous, structured physical activity, whether it's competitive rowing, basketball, or even intramural volleyball, forces the brain to focus entirely on the present physical moment.
It is a highly effective biological mechanism for processing and flushing out the stress hormones accumulated during intense academic study. It biologically regulates the nervous system.
Furthermore, team sports are essentially real-time simulators for complex group dynamics.
They teach the mechanics of collaboration, the humility required to play a supporting role, and the resilience needed to process immediate public failure and then immediately refocus on the next play.
It's applied psychology. Then you look at the clubs and societies, which serve as fantastic low-stakes environments for developing incredibly high-level soft skills.
Think about a student joining a debate club. They aren't just arguing.
They are learning how to rapidly synthesize opposing viewpoints, how to structure a logical counteroffensive on the fly, and how to master the physical mechanics of public speaking, voice modulation, eye contact, pacing.
Or take a drama society. That isn't just play acting. It fosters immense creative risk-taking, deep empathy required to inhabit another persona, and collaborative, real-time problem-solving when a prop breaks on stage.
Or environmental action group, which teaches a student how to organize a community, how to navigate local bureaucracy to get a permit, and how to practice actual grassroots leadership.
These are skills that simply cannot be effectively taught via a multiple-choice test.
The third pillar of this hidden curriculum is volunteering and direct community service.
Activities like tutoring younger, at-risk children, dedicating weekends to a local food bank, or organizing neighborhood infrastructure projects are essential for fostering a deep, visceral sense of empathy.
It pulls the student out of the self-centered bubble of academic anxiety and connects them to the tangible realities of their broader community, instilling a profound understanding of civic duty.
Now, this specific area sparks a fascinating, highly contentious debate in educational policy. Should community service be a mandatory requirement for high school graduation?
I find this debate fascinating because it really tests our definitions of altruism.
It really does.
On the pro side, the argument for mandatory service is highly pragmatic. Proponents argue that if you don't make it mandatory, the only students who will volunteer are those who already possess that civic mindset, or those privileged enough to have the free time.
Making it a universal requirement ensures that every single student, regardless of their background or natural inclinations, is forced to engage with their community and witness struggles outside their own experience.
It guarantees the installation of a baseline civic awareness. But the counter-argument is deeply philosophical. Does forcing a student to volunteer fundamentally assassinate the true spirit of volunteerism?
Right. If a teenager is only sorting cans at a food bank because they need exactly 40 hours logged to receive their diploma, does it just become another tedious transactional chore?
Does the coercion completely strip away the genuine empathy, the intrinsic motivation, and the personal moral growth that the act of volunteering is supposed to inherently foster?
It is a delicate balance between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. To navigate this, many systems attempt a hybrid approach.
They mandate the hours to ensure participation, but they grant the student absolute autonomy in choosing the specific cause or organization they dedicate their time to.
This autonomy helps preserve a sense of personal meaning and genuine engagement.
However, there is a very clear, dangerous warning regarding this entire hidden curriculum.
The overcommitment trap.
Yes. In highly competitive educational cultures, extracurriculars have been intensely gamified. Students believe they need to be the captain of the debate team, the star cellist, and the founder of a charity, just to be considered by an elite university.
This leads to them taking on an impossible roster of activities. Instead of fostering leadership, it leads right back into the crushing time management failures, sleep deprivation, and severe burnout we discussed earlier.
They spread their cognitive resources so thin that the quality of both their academic work and their extracurricular engagement plummets.
It defeats the whole purpose.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have talked extensively about physical schools, tuitions, clubs, and human interactions. But there is a massive, relentless force that is fundamentally disrupting every single pillar of education we have just discussed.
The digital transformation of the classroom.
Technology's impact over the last decade has been nothing short of a seismic paradigm shift. It is radically altering how we teach, how we consume information, and how we define the very boundaries of a school.
Without a doubt. And we have to look at the catalyst. While the digitization of education was already underway, the COVID-19 pandemic served as an unprecedented, involuntary, global stress test for remote learning.
Literally overnight, billions of students were forced onto platforms like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and asynchronous platforms like Khan Academy.
This massive global experiment threw the theoretical advantages of digital learning into sharp, undeniable reality.
It proved that learning could, in fact, be completely decoupled from physical geography.
It showcased the immense power of location independence, the flexibility of self-paced asynchronous lectures, and the ability to maintain educational continuity during a global crisis.
But let's be honest, we all lived through it. And that global experiment also brutally exposed the profound structural limitations of learning through a screen.
It certainly did.
For all its logistical convenience, prolonged online learning suffers from a devastating lack of genuine, spontaneous, face-to-face social interaction.
You lose the micro-expressions, the energy of a room, the casual conversations after class where real mentorship happens.
Teachers face the nearly impossible task of keeping 30 teenagers genuinely engaged through a grid of tiny, often muted video squares.
And then you have the constant friction of technical glitches, software crashes, and the massive logistical nightmare of trying to conduct fair, secure, uncheatable assessments remotely.
But beyond the annoyances of bad Wi-Fi, there is a much darker systemic issue that this digital shift exacerbated.
The digital divide.
The digital divide is arguably the most critical social justice issue in modern education.
It refers to the stark, socioeconomically driven disparity in access to necessary technology.
When a school district proudly announces they are moving to a fully digital, iPad-based curriculum, it sounds incredibly innovative.
But if a student goes home to an apartment without a reliable, high-speed internet connection, or if they have to share a single, outdated smartphone with 3 siblings to do their homework, they are immediately and severely disadvantaged.
This isn't just an inconvenience, it is digital redlining. It takes existing societal inequalities and magnifies them exponentially.
Exploring this tension, the incredible democratizing potential of global online access versus the brutal reality of the digital divide is essential. You cannot praise the tech without acknowledging who it leaves behind.
Addressing this requires massive policy interventions. Governments treating broadband internet as a fundamental public utility, direct subsidies for hardware in low-income households, and crucially, heavy investment in training teachers in actual digital pedagogy, not just how to unmute a microphone.
And it is important to note that this digital wave isn't just about remote learning. It has completely infiltrated the physical classroom as well.
We are looking at a tidal wave of edtech. The dusty chalkboard has been replaced by highly interactive, internet-connected smartboards.
We have learning management systems that track a student's engagement down to the millisecond.
But where this gets truly science fiction is the integration of artificial intelligence.
AI is changing the game entirely.
We are moving past simple, multiple-choice quizzes into the realm of AI tutors. Imagine a software program that doesn't just grade a math problem, but analyzes exactly how a student got it wrong.
It identifies the specific cognitive misconception and instantly generates a personalized practice set tailored to that exact weakness.
It is attempting to solve the famous two sigma problem in education. The idea that personalized one-on-one tutoring is vastly superior to a single teacher lecturing to 30 kids.
AI is trying to scale that personalized tutoring to the masses.
And looking slightly further down the horizon, we have to consider the incredible potential of deeply immersive technologies like virtual reality.
The pedagogical applications are astounding.
Instead of reading a dry, two-dimensional textbook about the Roman Empire, a history class puts on VR headsets and virtually walks through a historically accurate, fully rendered simulation of the Colosseum.
Medical students can practice complex, high-stakes surgical procedures in a completely safe, hyper-realistic, haptic feedback environment dozens of times before ever touching a real patient.
These technologies shift learning from passive consumption of text to active, visceral spatial experience. It is a profound shift in how the human brain encodes memory and understanding.
It really is.
So we have this massive digital tsunami washing over education globally, theoretically connecting everyone. But that brings us to a crucial realization.
While technology connects the hardware, our fundamental cultural paradigms still deeply and visibly dictate the software of how we approach learning.
Understanding these deep-seated cultural philosophies and the global inequities that persist alongside them is the final key to grasping the macro picture of global education.
To understand these cultural paradigms, sociologists often contrast traditional Western and Eastern educational philosophies.
Now, we must be incredibly careful not to reduce these to simple binary stereotypes, as both systems are highly complex and rapidly evolving.
However, historically and structurally, there are distinct philosophical foundations. Western systems, typically exemplified by the US, the UK, or Canada, have traditionally anchored their pedagogy in the ideals of the Enlightenment.
They prioritize individual expression, highly subjective creativity, critical questioning of authority, and a significant degree of student autonomy.
The goal is often to produce a disruptive innovator.
Conversely, traditional Eastern systems, looking at historical models in China, Singapore, or India, have often been anchored in Confucian ideals.
These systems place a much heavier emphasis on intense discipline, profound respect for hierarchical authority, the mastery of foundational knowledge through rigorous repetition and memorization, and the cultivation of an elite work ethic aimed at excelling in high-stakes societal examinations.
And this leads to endless debates about which philosophy is better.
The Western model is frequently celebrated for fostering out-of-the-box thinking and entrepreneurial spirit, but it is also heavily criticized for sometimes failing to instill basic, rigorous foundational knowledge.
You have kids who are told to be creative, but lack the basic math skills to execute their ideas.
On the flip side, the Eastern model is globally respected for producing incredibly strong, consistent, undeniable academic results in STEM fields and instilling formidable resilience.
But it faces criticism for potentially stifling unorthodox creativity and creating immense psychological pressure.
The reality is that the smartest systems are abandoning this either debate. They are actively synthesizing.
We are seeing Eastern systems heavily investing in project-based learning and innovation incubators, while Western systems are quietly realizing that direct, rigorous instruction and solid foundational knowledge are actually prerequisites for high-level creativity.
Beyond these philosophical debates, we cannot look at global education without confronting the stark reality of global inequality.
Despite the boom in AI and VR, there are still vast, devastating disparities in basic educational access driven by extreme poverty, geographic isolation, and gender discrimination.
In many parts of the developing world, the challenge isn't whether to use iPads or textbooks. The challenge is whether the school has a roof, running water, or a teacher who actually gets paid.
We must acknowledge initiatives like UNESCO's Education for All, which are actively working to close this profound access gap through targeted, massive policy interventions.
This involves international aid to build physical infrastructure, programs to eliminate school fees that keep girls out of classrooms, and complex supply chain logistics to deliver basic learning materials to remote areas.
And intimately connected to this global landscape is the massive phenomenon of student mobility. Millions of ambitious students cross international borders every single year to study abroad.
This movement is a phenomenal engine for cross-cultural exchange. It builds empathy, destroys xenophobia, and creates a highly valuable class of citizens who possess genuine global competencies.
But as we discussed with the concept of culture shock earlier, it requires navigating incredibly complex visa bureaucracies, overcoming deep language barriers, and enduring significant emotional and cultural dislocation.
Finally, within this global perspective, we must address the profound tension inherent in globalization itself.
As the world becomes more interconnected, there's a powerful drive towards standardized global curricula. Programs like the International Baccalaureate or the Cambridge International Exams are being adopted by thousands of schools worldwide.
The pragmatic benefit is clear. Standardization creates seamless global mobility. An admissions officer at Oxford knows exactly what an IB diploma from a school in Nairobi or a school in Tokyo represents.
It creates a universal academic currency.
However, sociologists raise a vital, critical concern regarding this trend, the very real risk of cultural erosion.
There's a legitimate fear that as schools universally adopt these sleek, generic, Western-centric global frameworks, rich local traditions, indigenous histories, nuanced local literature, and unique cultural contexts are marginalized or completely erased from the curriculum.
It is a profound, unresolved tension between the economic desire for a frictionless, recognized global standard and the deeply human need to preserve unique, localized cultural identities.
Okay, we have traversed a staggering amount of terrain. We've looked at the tracking systems of Germany, the economics of a $50,000 degree, the psychological toll of Hagwons, the realities of the digital divide, and the philosophies of East versus West.
We covered a lot of ground.
But how do we actually use this? The research we've been analyzing concludes by pivoting to something incredibly practical. How you, the listener, can take this vast web of complex sociological knowledge and actually articulate it clearly in your own life.
Because having the knowledge is only half the battle. The other half is communicating it persuasively, whether you are debating policy at a town hall, writing a thesis, or just having a deep conversation at a dinner party.
Exactly. The ability to synthesize and communicate complex, multifaceted information is the ultimate meta skill.
The research provides highly tactical advice for this. First, it emphasizes the immense power of categorizing your vocabulary. Human memory is associative. Rather than trying to memorize isolated facts or words, you need to build mental filing cabinets.
For example, create a mental category for the digital transformation. Inside that category, you deliberately cluster precise terminology: digital divide, technological disparity, asynchronous learning, algorithmic bias, and digital pedagogy.
Then, create a category for the psychology of student life and cluster terms like cognitive bandwidth, extrinsic motivation, holistic development, and high-stakes assessment.
By organizing your vocabulary conceptually, you aren't just memorizing. You are building a structured, readily accessible intellectual toolkit.
When a specific topic arises, you open that specific mental drawer, and you have the exact, precise language required to dissect it.
And it goes beyond just individual words. It is about the architecture of your arguments. When you are dealing with the highly nuanced, polarizing debates we've covered, like free state-funded education versus private investment, or the merits of early vocational tracking, you cannot rely on simplistic binary thinking.
You must structure your communication to reflect the complexity of the issue. You have to clearly articulate the pro-arguments, rigorously examine the counter-arguments, and then synthesize a nuanced conclusion.
And to do that, you use sophisticated linking language. Words and phrases like furthermore, conversely, notwithstanding, or while it is evident that.
These aren't just fancy filler words. They are the structural steel that holds a complex, multi-layered argument together and guides your listener through your logic.
Furthermore, the research suggests rigorous active practice. It challenges you to take a massive, sprawling topic, say the economic ripple effects of global student debt, and ruthlessly distill its core message down into a tight, highly accurate 50-word summary.
That kind of constraint forces you to strip away the fluff, rely on your most precise vocabulary, and identify the absolute, undeniable core of the issue.
What's truly fascinating here is the underlying philosophy regarding language itself, something akin to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which suggests that the structure of a language shapes the speaker's cognition.
Having a rich, precise, categorized vocabulary is not about elitism or trying to sound academic. It is fundamentally about having the necessary resolution to actually see and understand the problem.
If you do not possess this specific phrase, digital divide, you might just look at a failing online student and assume they are lazy.
Yeah.
The vocabulary gives you the lens to see the systemic inequality.
When you can precisely articulate the subtle differences between rote memorization and foundational knowledge acquisition, or when you can clearly explain the economic trade-offs of an income-contingent loan, you are not just speaking better.
You are demonstrating a fundamentally deeper, more rigorous, and more empathetic understanding of how the machinery of the world actually functions.
That's the real power of language.
So what does this all mean for you? Let's take a breath and briefly look back at the incredible, expansive journey we have taken together today.
We started by examining the very structural blueprints of learning, comparing the rigid, standardized milestones of the UK with the highly deliberate, early vocational tracking in Germany. And we deconstructed the stark philosophical contrast between Japan's rigorous exam culture and Finland's highly autonomous, holistic approach.
We impartially debated the staggering economics of higher education, weighing the crushing burden of U.S. tuition against the complex tax realities of Germany's publicly funded model.
We explored the immense, often undervalued importance of alternative vocational pathways like Australia's TAFE and the democratization of the online learning boom.
We dove deep into the relentless psychological pressures of modern student life, from the cortisol-spiking late-night hagwons of South Korea to the bandwidth-draining financial burdens of international students and the deep, isolating complexities of cultural shock.
We weighed the vital importance of the hidden curriculum, how sports regulate stress, how clubs build leadership, and the ethical debate over mandatory volunteering against the very real danger of the overcommitment trap.
We analyzed the massive digital transformation, acknowledging both the incredible logistical flexibility of online learning and the severe systemic threat of digital redlining, while peeking into the future of AI tutors and VR simulations.
And finally, we explored macro-global perspectives, deconstructing the stereotypes of Western and Eastern philosophies, noting the tension between standardized global curricula and the preservation of local culture, all before wrapping up with tactical advice on how to use precise language to articulate these massive concepts clearly.
It is a vast, interconnected landscape. And understanding these multifaceted structures, these deep-seated economic challenges, and these diverse global philosophies does so much more than just provide you with interesting trivia.
It equips you to engage with the world in a fundamentally more thoughtful, analytical, and empathetic way.
When you read the news about an upcoming teacher strike, when you vote on a local municipal bond for school funding, or when you are simply discussing the future of the economy with your colleagues, you now possess a highly structured, deeply nuanced framework for understanding the invisible forces that shape how our societies learn, adapt, and ultimately evolve.
Absolutely. It changes how you view the world.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought experiment to mull over on your own.
I'm intrigued.
We talked extensively about the digital transformation, and we touched on the incredible speculative future of artificial intelligence and virtual reality in education. Let's take that trajectory to its logical, perhaps extreme science fiction conclusion.
Okay, let's hear it.
If artificial intelligence eventually becomes so incredibly advanced that it can act as the absolute perfect, infinitely patient, flawlessly personalized academic tutor for every single subject.
A tutor for every student.
Right. And if virtual reality becomes so hyper-immersive that it can flawlessly simulate any advanced chemistry lab, any historical site, or any collaborative architectural workspace perfectly from a student's living room.
The ultimate digital classroom.
Will the physical brick-and-mortar schools and massive university campuses of the future even need to exist for academic reasons?
That's a huge question.
If the pure, rigorous transmission of academic knowledge is handled entirely and flawlessly by algorithms and headsets at home, does the school of the future just become a place we go strictly to learn how to be human with each other?
A purely social hub.
Do schools just become massive, physical, social hubs purely for playing sports, performing theater, and building empathy, completely stripped of traditional academic classrooms?
That is an incredibly profound, almost existential question for the field of education. It forces us to strip away the buildings and the tests and ask what the true, irreplaceable core of the human educational experience really is. Is it the data, or is it the friction of learning alongside other flawed humans? It is definitely something to ponder as we watch these systems continue to rapidly, unpredictably evolve.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive, deep, and winding journey today. We genuinely hope this deep dive has provided you with a wealth of new knowledge, multiple nuanced perspectives to consider, and the linguistic tools to articulate these massive concepts in your own life. We warmly invite you to return for our next exploration together. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and take care.